Hi, I'm Brett Cenkus. I'm an M&A lawyer and an M&A advisor. So on the law side, we do agreements to buy and sell businesses, represent clients who are buying and selling. And on the M&A advisory side, we represent businesses to find buyers. So it's more of a marketing and kind of sales job. And most of my day-to-day life is M&A law, but I kind of wear both hats. Today we're going to do a grab bag of questions I've been asked. I appreciate everyone interacting with the videos, engaging and asking questions. I think I do a pretty good job of keeping up with those questions, but every now and again I realize I missed some, so this is just a kind of a grab bag of questions that people have asked on my at the bottom of my videos, basically with engaging with them. And this is a precursor to cleaning things up because we're going to get out there and put some more videos out into the world. So these are all M&A questions. We're going to talk about disclosure schedule, timing of disclosure schedules. We're going to talk about why a company would buy assets rather than equity. Well, let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to do 4 or 5 questions here. The first one I just touched on is, so this is a question from Mitchell. It says, why would someone want to buy just the assets of a business over the equity? It doesn't seem reasonable for the seller to do such a thing because of tax reasons, but I don't understand why a buyer would want to choose assets over equity. Could you give your professional opinion on the matter? So thank you for the question, Mitchell. Just kind of get out of the way, it doesn't seem reasonable for the seller to do such a thing, meaning selling the assets. I think he's getting at right there. The sellers generally want to sell equity because it's easier to transfer liabilities. When you do an asset purchase, you just take the good stuff. But it's usually a little more tax favorable, sometimes much more tax favorable for the seller. But the question fundamentally is about why would a buyer buy assets? So people often hear the question, that asset sale, and they think, oh, I'm not buying the business, I'm just buying some assets. And that is incorrect. It can be such that in a bankruptcy or some other context, a buyer might just pick off one asset. But when we talk about 3 different ways that a business can be purchased, sold, we think about mergers, stock or equity sales, and asset sales. All 3. Think about all 3 are buying the whole business. So when we say asset sale as a type of M&A structure, we don't mean just taking a couple of assets. We mean taking absolutely every single asset, just about, other than sometimes some personal assets or so on. We mean leaving the liabilities behind. Now, some liabilities you can't leave behind as easily, and there's a successor liability concept, but you're taking the whole business. It's just being transferred from one company to another, almost like on a giant bill of sale. But don't think it's not the whole business. It's contracts, intellectual property. Employees aren't assets exactly, but they're moving over as well. It's all kind of being brought over to the buyer's new or existing entity. So the question really is assuming that the whole business isn't being bought or sold, but yet it is. And buyers generally like to buy assets, certainly down in the lower end of the market, what we call Main Street, a couple $1 million and under, and then even in what we call the lower middle market, 25 to 50 million. So below all that, there's a lot of asset deals. As you get up into big public companies, could never do it. The idea of transferring, it's not like you have to itemize every paperclip, but transferring all that stuff on a giant bill of sale doesn't make any sense. And then there's reasons with contracts that they can be hard to assign sometimes. But the lower end of the market, that's where things get done. Buyers like it because they can mark the assets up to fair value and depreciate them again on their balance sheet. Whereas if they took over the stock, they would take the book value of the assets as currently depreciated. And they also like that they can leave the liabilities behind much, much more easily than if they do a stock or an equity deal. So thank you for the question, Mitchell. Next question, timing of disclosure schedules. So this comes from Flows TV, and I won't read the whole question, it's really sort of coming at it from different angles, but the gist of it is, my understanding is that disclosure schedules be provided at the due diligence stage, but is it okay to actually put them together, review and change them during the interim period between signing and closing a deal? Great question, thank you. The number one, not every deal is a bifurcated sign and close. We do a lot of deals, especially down in that Main Street lower middle market, where the day you sign is the day the business is sold. It's the closing date as well. But some deals it's separated for different reasons, including that there's approvals that need to be gathered, or financing needs to be arranged, or all sorts of reasons. And when that happens, right, the disclosure schedules have to be completed at the time of signing. They can't be completed after and before closing. The reason for that is disclosure schedules are a very material part of the deal. The buyer needs to be, because in a sign and then close deal, the deal needs to be totally done. The deal needs to be entirely done and the parties need to be committed, with the exception maybe of certain conditions. There's going to be a finite list of conditions that would allow the buyer to get out of the deal or the seller to get out of the deal. And generally those are going to be conditions that are not within the control of the parties or not entirely. You want to know the deal is done, right? It's just the closing is pushed. And now there's some things like if there's a financing condition, well, it's not done because the buyer might not get the financing. That's just possible. You're trying to account for the buyer trying to game the system and purposely not get the financing, but that could be a condition. But again, it's a list of finite conditions. So the deal is completely inked, everything. And the disclosure schedules are, they could be disclosures of information, names of employees and compensation, salaries, things like that. They could be carve-outs from reps and warranties. So an example might be, the seller might say, except as set forth in Schedule 4.1, there is no existing litigation. Then Schedule 4.1 would list the carve-outs. There might be some active items. And so the buyer needs to know everything that they're buying. And it's possible they would already know through due diligence, but maybe not. And they want to understand what the buyer's putting on these disclosure schedules because they can function as a shifting risk. Right, so if the buyer accepts the disclosure schedule as listed, like with those items of litigation, they're accepting that that's on them, unless they do something else. It's except as set forth, there are these litigation items. And then if they accept the schedule and the list of them, all the risk of those items and what happens with them shifts. So they really need to understand they're an integral part of the deal. Sometimes disclosure schedules are brought down, so things might be updated as of the closing, but those are just informational disclosure schedules, like the list of material contracts or employees or something, to the extent it is okay that it changes between signing and closing, might be updated at closing. But all those sort of carve-out disclosure schedules, and it's a big part of it, they need to be fully baked at signing. Here's a question from Gray. The question is, this one goes back a little bit. So again, I try to keep up on these. Thank you everyone for submitting questions and engaging. And this one just did not hit. In the hospitality industry, why would you think companies such as Hilton, Hyatt, etc. are aggressively trying to find mergers and partnerships in relation to the economic turmoil caused by the pandemic? So the question is about in the hotel or hospitality industry, why were big brands getting aggressive as acquirers? I'm not sure what Gray means by partnerships. Let's just talk generally. I'm not really specifically dialed into like how acquisitive Hilton or Hyatt were, but just generally speaking, one is I think it's Warren Buffett who talks about like you want to buy when there's, I don't know if he said blood in the streets, but the idea of being basically, you want to be a buyer when things are rough, when sellers are willing to sort of be easier to give things away when things are tough. And we can talk about whether or not that's predatory and so forth. I mean, I've got a good video out there about the M&A Monopoly Act law that they tried to pass a couple years ago. I don't remember the name of it, but you can check that out for my views on like whether or not I think this is predatory. And just generally speaking, I think it's a market and an M&A buyer's in there trying to get the best deal that they can, and that's how the whole deal, that's how everything is set up. And if the seller is willing to take a deal, presumably it's the best deal on the table. So to act like that deal shouldn't exist, that offer shouldn't exist because it feels like a better deal to the buyer. I mean, again, no one's got a gun to the seller's head. I mean, things might be tough, but it's the best deal on the table. So anyway, you can disagree with that, but if you've got a great balance sheet and you've been around for years, like Hilton and Hyatt, or like the private equity groups were getting very active during the pandemic because there were industries, and this was one of them, hospitality, that was hit really hard. And everyone might know it's going to come back, but there are a lot of casualties along the way, and a lot of businesses that can't afford that weren't able to get through. And they were just huge. I mean, no one was traveling for months there. I mean, just massive. Businesses were massively off in terms of the revenue and the income, and so that just had a huge impact. So a lot of good assets out there. And hospitality, particularly hotel industry, is one that's very asset driven. So even if you're having employee issues, like when a business starts to have trouble, they're laying people off, people are sensing they're going to be laid off, they're moving. businesses can be hit pretty hard from an operational perspective. The businesses really, they're heavy on fixed assets, like a hotel, right? You need people to run a hotel, there's no question. They're very important to that. But a lot of the deal is the real estate, is the dirt in the building that's there. So that's going to be fine, right? So if you can be a buyer in there during those times, you're going to get some good opportunities. And again, the private equity groups were very active in some spaces. I don't know specifically about hospitality, but the other reason is because the markets did very, very well. And I don't know that anyone would have really predicted that going into the pandemic, but the stock market did tremendously. And so there's a correlation between M&A activity and the markets. And the reason for that is exactly the opposite of what I just told you, which is you should be buying when things are down. But people buy when they're up because executives, C-suite executives in companies feel good about the future and they're spending more. It's not unlike individuals in the household income. When they feel like everything's going great and going gangbusters, they take an extra vacation, they buy that, they do that home remodel. They don't need these things when things aren't going well, when the outlook isn't going well. When it's going well, stock prices are up. Now a lot of public deals are done. The currency is not cash. The currency is the stock of the acquirer. And so if your stock is flying high, you've got more value to go be a buyer, right? So, and then if there's more financing, which is in step with the markets doing well, there's going to be more money out there to be doing acquisitions. And so you've got a number of factors that make a pretty good correlation between public markets and M&A activity, even in the private sector. And so those things are going to be contributing. There's more money available, and even Hilton and Hyatt like to use OPM, other people's money. So there's going to be a lot of activity in spaces when you've got strong, stalwart brands that are solid, and they're realizing, hey, it's a good time to be acquiring, and there's a lot of money available to do it. Okay, great question. Really important question. This is from Mike, and it was a question that he put in the comments to my video, part 3 of Why Do Businesses Buy Other Businesses, or M&A Motivations. And Mike asks, he said, great content, thank you, Mike. Did you shed a tear at 8:50 into the video? And I didn't. I wiped my eye, and it was just stuff. So, but thank you, Mike, for noticing, being just so attentive. I appreciate that. This is from Arthur, and he asks, do investment banks help their clients identify and find potential acquisition targets? Absolutely. Okay. Now, in the lower end of the market, where you've heard, if you watch some of my other videos about investment bankers and business brokers, you know that they fundamentally do the same thing. We do some M&A advisory out of a brand called Braaten Woods, non-legal, that's just helping companies find buyers and sort of price themselves and market and close deals from the business side of things. But what we do deals just because of our size and it's a young brand. I mean, no one gives us billion-dollar deals, right? It's not to say I couldn't work on one, right, or haven't, but here it's smaller deals. It's Main Street, $5-10 million deals. At that end of the market, there's not a lot of sort of buy-side work, and I can come up with theories why that's, I can give you theories why I think that is true. But it's one of the reasons is because those buyers at that part of the market, generally, it's not big private equity groups and very well-heeled institutional and strategic buyers. It's not necessarily other small business, but it's kind of more like small business. And they're probably not willing to pay the retainers that you need to get investment banks to go do that kind of bird donkey. Once you go up the chain, absolutely, investment banks, Goldman Sachs, and the big banks will do that kind of work. They'll make calls and they'll go find acquisition opportunities. They do it for really significant monthly retainers usually. And the reason for that is because you have no idea if this buyer's ever going to buy. Obviously they can look at GE and Cisco and big companies and know they're going to buy sometime, but you don't know if they're going to buy a deal that the investment bank is working on. GE and Goldman aren't a great example there, but the point is, if you're doing this, it's kind of like residential real estate. It's viewed generally as it's much better to be a listing agent. You know the seller wants to sell. On the buy side, you can run around all day and the buyer just changes their mind. Now, a seller can change their mind, but I haven't seen stats, but I've got to think it's wildly lower than a buyer changing their mind. They've got a house already, and the idea that they would want to sell it at some point is a given. You don't know that buyers are necessarily, you don't know if they get financing, right? There's contingencies on the buyer side that are really important. That's a big one, right? Seller doesn't need that. They're going to get a check, not borrow money. So there's all sorts of reasons why it's sort of safer to be on the listing side, and that's the same in M&A. And so if we were someone who's come to us for this, we would never do it for contingency only. It doesn't make any sense. We always do a small upfront retainer, all or upfront fee, because we front load the work on those deals so much, even on the sell side. But we don't charge usually a monthly retainer. Regional banks and bigger banks will charge a large monthly retainer, but on the buy side, even larger. And again, it's to compensate for the fact that a deal might not go down. And usually those fees, by the way, are credited to a closing. But from where I sit, if we were doing that and just only getting paid if people closed, it'd be so much work with no promise of a payday. It wouldn't make any sense. And so I don't think that's one of the reasons it doesn't happen at the lower levels. I don't think that smaller businesses are really interested in paying those fees. Bigger businesses, private equity groups, they got a lot of money. And the way they spend fees, no one's giving money away, but they spend a lot more money on research and consulting and things that are kind of discretionary, but they build it in their model compared to smaller business. I was chief legal counsel or general counsel for a public company, and we used to always marvel. One guy I worked with used to joke the best job in the world is being a consultant to our company, and we were just a normal. You've got C-suite executives who need to solve big problems and research and things like that, or investment banks finding acquisition targets is worth it. It's worth it. And it's not necessarily at the lower level. So thank you, Arthur, for that question. And let me do one more. This is a good one. It's not quite the tear in the eye, but it's not as sort of technical as others. I have a question here. What business-oriented books would you recommend a law student interested in corporate law should read to get a better understanding of a business's perspective in M&A transactions? It's a great question. I've got a video out there about 3 books a law student, or I forget now, there's a lot of video content out there, but that I think young associates or people wanting to get into this space might want to read. But this is about specifically M&A from a business's perspective. So the one book that comes to mind and that I'll always recommend, and it's been many years, it's about the corporate M&A environment, the corporate M&A market in the 80s. And so it was a really crazy time of leveraged buyouts and corporate raiders, and just, it depends on what perspective you want to have. What philosophically sort of you come at things as thinking it's the worst time, and others think it's sort of the sexiest, most exciting time. But it was an interesting time. And there's a book written called Barbarians at the Gate, and the book is about the rise and the fall of RJR Nabisco. Basically about what was going on. And it was for sale, basically, the whole M&A process, and what was happening leading up to the sale of RJR Nabisco. It's fascinating. It is an amazing, amazing book. It's been 20 years since I read it, which is why I'm having trouble with the name, the name. But it is so good. I've recommended it so many times. And it's going to get in there. It's going to have a lot of insight. Again, this is different levels and different time. So maybe not. I've got one other idea to recommend, but I'll tell you, this is an amazing, amazing read that captures a really unique moment in a wild, frenzied market of M&A, and it will give you a lot of good insight into a lot of different looks, including the businesses look at the table, but also the bankers, the lawyers, and it's just a fascinating read. The second book I'll recommend is called Acquired, Now What? And it's by a gentleman named Kino Vigil. And I have not read this book, so that is a caveat, but it is on my list, and I've kind of been through it. It's recommended to me. It's the question was, what books can you recommend from a business's perspective? And I've read lots and lots of books that are from the perspective of an attorney and practicing and legal and documentation, things like that. And then I recommended the last book about RJR Nabisco, which is it's not fictional, but it reads more like a story. This book is informational, and it's written from an employee standpoint, is my understanding of perspective. So there's a lot about hey, what's going to happen to the company when you're acquired? That's very different than most of the other books out there. That's why it caught my attention and it had been recommended to me, and it's on my list. And I think, again, from a business's perspective, if you want to know how people are affected by acquisitions, how their worlds change, what the integration process looks like,
that's a book that you might check out. It's available on Amazon. Again, Keno Vigil acquired. Now what? If you have read it or you do read it, we'd love you to drop down a comment and let me know what you thought of it. Again, it's on my list, but it's a lengthy list, so depending on what I'm told is going to determine how quickly I get to that one. But there's 2 books that you can consider, a little more about the M&A process. Great question. So I appreciate you listening today. If you like this video, head on over to merger-resources.com. All my videos, articles, all sorts of tools and templates and checklists, everything M&A and all free all the time is available over there, merger-resources.com. I will see you in the next video.